running out, and for now, all signs of progress seem to be running into the sand. And The Independent says, you know what, this debt ceiling, it's not necessary. It talks about the false ceiling in its editorial today. The U.S. debt limit is redundant and dangerous. It's time for Congress to scrap it. But it's hard to do politically because, according to The Independent, the polarization of the U.S. political system has turned this debt ceiling into an extremist's weapon of mass destruction, and the extremists, according to The Independent, will not want to let it go.
However, there are some attempts, aren't there, to try and reach some kind of bipartisan deal?
That's right. The International New York Times takes a closer look at one of these deals that's been put forward by Republican Senator Susan Collins. Now, she and two other Republican women started a bipartisan group that's paving the way towards a deal, and half of the women of this group are women. And so the International New York Times takes a look at the role of women in trying to pave out this deal here. And it says that though the Senate is still dominated by men, women on both sides of the political divide are proving to be really key into hacking out these deals. And this could be a sign for legislation to come. In fact, John McCain even joked about it. He said, the women are taking over.
OK, well, no doubt several cartoonists kind of having a bit of a field day on this one.
Absolutely. Let's start by looking at China Daily that says this is just one problem that's facing Obama right now. On top of that, he has bonds, payment default, cash crunch. All this looks like a Halloween nightmare for Obama there, who looks pretty scared. Also in the International New York Times, a cartoon by Shapat, how this makes the U.S. look abroad. You can see Americans sitting at a negotiation table with Iran there. They're saying, although the government is closed, we're open to talking.
At least somebody is. Paper's also focusing on a case of rape in the US that's been taken over by the internet group Anonymous.
That's right. This is getting a lot of attention, especially in the US press. This took place in the town of Maryville in Missouri. You can read about it in Slate. And a lot of people are comparing this to the Steubenville, Ohio rape case that became a real national issue. Now, in Maryville, it was a 14-year-old girl named Daisy Coleman, and her name has been released to the press by her parents. Now, she was allegedly raped while drunk to the point of unconsciousness by a high school football star who from a very powerful family in Maryville. Now, charges were dropped against him, and so Anonymous has really taken this issue into hand and is wondering why these charges were dropped, and is targeting actually the county prosecutor to get the case to be reopened.
Now, the International New York Times, you mentioned it just a second ago. Of course, it was their first edition yesterday. Today, they're focusing on a silent killer in Africa.
That's right, and that silent killer is cancer. The International New York Times says that cancer has long been neglected in developing countries because it's been overshadowed by the struggle against more acute threats like malaria and AIDS. But the struggle against infectious diseases has been quite successful, so now people are living long enough to develop cancer. And so the International New York Times takes a closer look, especially at the case of breast cancer in Africa. And it says that women in Africa are often trapped by stigma, poverty, and misinformation, and so that they don't seek help until it's too late. And then when it comes to treatment, well, they often face delays due to scarce resources, incompetence, and corruption. But health officials say there's hope because given how well Africa has fought malaria and AIDS, there could be hope for cancer as well.
And finally, you've come up with a religious take, or you haven't, the papers have, on dieting.
That's right. This is in the Daily Beast. This comes after comments the televangelist Pat Robertson made last week. He said that the low-carb diet violated the principles that God set down. So the Daily Beast takes a closer look. What would Jesus eat? What is a biblical diet? Well, it depends on which section of the Bible you're looking at. At the beginning, we were all vegans. It says that Adam and Eve ate locally sourced, organically grown vegetation. You know they were composting, says this article. Then as you get to the Old Testament, well, you have pure and impure meat. And Jesus, well, he was quite a fan of the Mediterranean diet. Fish, bread, and of course, wine. But he never talked about eating meat or flesh, except for when it came to eating his own flesh.
Exactly, what a charming thought. Thanks very much, Flo Vilmino, with the international newspapers here on France 24. We're going to go to business now. Matthew's joining us here on set. We're starting with the US. Of course, as we've been reporting, just under 21 hours to go until the US reaches its borrowing limit, Matthew.
That's right. Now, it won't mean that the US is immediately in default. As you say, it's the borrowing limit that they will hit. It will be some difficult days and weeks ahead, if it goes on that long, as they try to manage their finances to avoid, in particular, a default on the debt. That's what's really worrying investors around the world. And as you've been reporting, we've seen one of the credit agencies saying this political brinkmanship has gone on for too long. They've given a negative outlook now to the AAA rating. This is Fitch that we are talking about, and they've joined Standard & Poor's, who've already actually downgraded them. Fitch saying, well, if you continue with this kind of behaviour, if you like, that's what might happen to you as well.
Markets getting nervous on how these talks are going?
Yeah, that's right. Markets were pretty concerned in the US. We saw them falling on Tuesday. Now, after those drops, we saw most of the markets falling in Asia in this Wednesday's trading session. But in fact, the Nikkei was one that managed to just pop its head above water by the end of the trading session. But the Shanghai Composite there in China in particular concern, that's down over 2%. Let's take a look at European markets and how those are opening. I can tell you that London, Paris, Frankfurt, they're all slipping back as well, particularly here in Paris, down by more than 0.5%, as you can see there. One other bit of news here in France as well is on new business startups. The number in September was an increase of 4.6%. That's a total of 46,000 new businesses created here in France. Well, that's a timely way to talk about our next guest, because we're going to talk about business startups, and in particular an award that's given here in France called the Ivy Award. Now, it's an annual award given to outstanding young leaders in the technology sector under 35. And well, we're happy to have here in the studio with us the winner of this year's award. It was given just last night, Gauthier Machelon.
Hi.
Thank you for joining us. Now, you run a posting website. It's called multiposting.fr. You post up job advertising and that kind of thing. Congratulations on winning the award. Tell us, first of all, a bit more about this company that you've set up.
So we are a company of 70 people at the moment. We have offices in France, Poland and Belgium. And as you say, we develop a HR software which enables a recruiter to post his job once and then to broadcast it on several job boards, schools, alumni, social network. And after, you can have some statistics in order to know from which job boards he receives some resumes. So you can save some time and save some money thanks to our product.
Of course, we've all just been through this big economic crisis, haven't we? We still are, some would say. I mean, has that affected the way that companies recruit?
Yes, obviously. I mean, if you look for the employment sector since 2008, it's been devastated. And I think when now company wants to recruit, they want to save some money. That's why we had to change our product and to market our product differently, and just to insist on how to make some economy to our recruiters. And it's mean now they use more free job boards, they use more schools, and they try to recruit in this way and avoiding payment job board or headhunter company.
And you operate this website internationally as well, don't you? Not just here in France.
Yeah. In fact, we broadcast our jobs in 50 countries at the moment.
Wow.
And the goal of the company is to have 2 or 3 new offices every year in other countries. So I think the next one will be probably in Europe and then in Asia.
And one interesting thing that we've talked about a lot here in France generally is the fact that some people say the climate for people starting new businesses is not really very favourable. What do you say about that? How do you find it here in France?
I can compare it with the States because I also co-founded a company in the US, in San Francisco. And I would say, to be very objective, that in the US it's more easier to raise some money. This is true. In France we have a problem to raise some money. But in France also you have a lot of subsidies. And I think it's important to say it. When you're a tech company, the States will help a lot your company. And if you want to build a technology team, I think it's very good to do it in France because we have a lot of good developers. They're cheaper than in the US. And so we have a lot of assets, but I think people don't say it very often, but it's good to say it again. And you can create some company in France and you can hire some people in France and and do good business in France.
Okay, well, Gauthier Machelon, thanks. Congratulations again on winning it, and
Well
thanks
done.
very much for joining us.
Thanks.
Gauthier, thanks very much. Thanks to Matthew as well. We've got a lot more, of course, coming up here on France 24, the very latest news very shortly, and also coming up in Focus. Our reporters, well, they'll be going undercover to find out just how easy it is to get false papers here in France. All that coming up in the next half hour on France 24, so don't go away. I wasn't sure how they were ending there.
No, not at all.
We got there.